I developed like a woman through puberty. Here's a picture. Now I have 1,500 nanograms per deciliter testosterone. So what's the relationship between ejaculation, between male orgasm and testosterone? Let's start with clinical studies and like studies and shit, like, scientists. So what happens when you ejaculate as a man? What happens when orgasm is achieved? There's a peak in your prolactin, right? Prolactin is released. So what does this prolactin actually do? What is prolactin? Well, it's a hormone just like testosterone and estrogen. And some scientists say, some people who know about the subjects, they say that prolactin is the antagonist to testosterone, like the enemy, the opposite of testosterone, right? Some people say, no, well, estrogen is, right? Because women have estrogen and males have testosterone. And to be honest, it is bullshit, because men also have estrogen, and they need a certain ratio of testosterone to estrogen. Otherwise, the benefits of testosterone aren't felt, right? When you have steroid users who inhibit their their estrogen production too much through, inhibitors of aromatase, the enzyme which converts testosterone into estrogen. These guys, they lose those benefits. They report like lower libido, not bad, like low energy levels, fatigue, basically signs of low testosterone, despite the fact that they're on steroids, because their estrogen to testosterone balance is fucked, basically, right? So estrogen is extremely needed. But what does prolactin actually do? When it's spiked, this lasts. Let's begin with the fact that this lasts for about 1 hour. So 1 hour after orgasm, prolactin is spiked, and it lasts for about an hour, after which it returns back to normal. Now, within that hour, this prolactin makes the Leydig cells. It sort of halts them. It inhibits their production, right? Like hitting the brake in your car, right? So it inhibits the Leydig cells to produce testosterone. Now, another thing that prolactin does, that's in the brain, is it actually inhibits the production of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. What is that? Remember, in our brain, gonadotropin-releasing hormone is released, and when that is released in a pulsatile manner, it then goes into the pituitary and it stimulates, right? So this is released, it stimulates the production of luteinizing hormone, which then travels inside of the bloodstream down to our testicles, down to our nuts, and it stimulates testosterone, right? So that's how this whole system works. Now, naturally, if you produce less of this, if the pulsation of gonadotropin-releasing hormone are less, you're going to be producing less luteinizing hormone. And less of that luteinizing hormone is actually going to travel into the nuts, because naturally it's not being produced. So you're going to have less signaling into the Leydig cells to actually produce more testosterone. So less gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Now, finally, which in my opinion is the most significant, also through anecdotal experience, but the most significant effect of this prolactin spike is a decrease in the genetic expression of luteinizing hormone receptors found on your testicles, right? When this hormone travels down the bloodstream, it goes into the Leydig cells, right? And it attaches itself to receptors. Those Leydig cells, they have, remember, a receptor is like a port, and your luteinizing hormone, your hormone, is like a ship. If you don't have enough ports, those ships can't dock, they can't leave the cargo, they can't signal to the cells to do something. Not only do you have less luteinizing hormone production because of the gonadotropin-releasing hormone decrease, but now you also have less receptors for that luteinizing hormone, which causes even less signaling. This effect right here, it's not so easy, because when you downregulate the genetic expression of a receptor, it's not that it lasts an hour. The only information about timescales, about intervals, periods that I could find when it comes to this effect is approximately a 2-week decrease. A 2-week decrease. Now that was in rams, right? So it was an animal model, but it basically showed that the luteinizing hormone receptors found in the nuts, it only gets back to normal 1 hour after a prolactin spike. Whether that's accurate or not, it's up to you to decide, but I can really attest to this when it comes to my personal anecdotal experience. When I had my testosterone levels checked the other time that I showed you in the beginning of the video, I don't know, for about 1, maybe even 2 weeks, I didn't ejaculate, right? And my luteinizing hormone was relatively low, which means that my testes were very, very sensitive to that luteinizing hormone, right? That luteinizing hormone was causing a big effect. There was a lot of receptors, there was a lot of signaling. So you can see how on that basis, this prolactin spike might actually be more detrimental than you think. It's up to you to decide. We're going to talk about like mindsets and personal experience in a bit, but this is just the pure facts, the pure biochemistry. Okay, so we have the prolactin increase. Now, another thing that happens is a dopamine spike. Now, what does that do? Obviously, dopamine is responsible for motivation. You've heard it all before. When you spike something, such as a neurotransmitter, even things like insulin, even alcohol, remember what happens, right? Tolerance. So when you spike dopamine, naturally, your body, your brain is going to become more tolerant. It's going to downregulate the expression of dopamine receptors. So it's going to be harder for you to achieve that state of motivation. That's the dopamine spike. And obviously, as you know, when you orgasm, the dopamine spike is quite high, right? So naturally, you're going to downregulate your dopamine receptors if you do it too much. So that's number two. The third one, I'm not even going to write it down because you've all heard it before. There is, after 7 days of abstinence, you have a 145% increase in your testosterone, right? It basically looks like this. You have your regular testosterone, and then it spikes, and then goes back to normal. And this thing lasts for approximately 24 hours, approximately, right? This is day 1, this is day 7, this is day 8. So after day 8, it returns back to normal. This is basically like your, I like to think about it as your body is basically just kicking and screaming like, bro, go out there and impregnate a woman, you know what I mean? Go out there. So, you know, you can use this, you can leverage this, do what you want with that information. The third thing, which in my opinion is the most important out of this, is the effects it has on androgen receptors, testosterone receptors in the brain. Now, our entire body has testosterone receptors. Our muscles, our brain, our testicles, our bones, fucking hell, even our white blood cells. These all have both estrogen and testosterone receptors. This is why it's so important to like prioritize this, you know what I mean? Because you don't only get more gains, you actually get a more masculine mindset even. The way you think is much more prone to like achieving goals, to being fearless, being ruthless, right? One thing that ejaculating does is it actually downregulates, it decreases the amount of androgen receptors in your brain, especially in the regions that are responsible for how you feel fear. There's a region in the brain called the amygdala. And that amygdala is basically responsible for how intensely you feel fear. And one thing that testosterone does very nicely is it goes into the amygdala and it blocks those receptors, because fear is nothing more than a biochemical reaction. It's basically a receptor, and the sort of fear molecule comes, it attaches itself, and it signals to the brain that we're you know, anxiety, fear, all that. Now testosterone comes in and it blocks that receptor, so those fear molecules, they can't actually work. It turns out that when you downregulate those receptors for testosterone, there's less of that to do its job, right? There's more fear that is being felt. So you're basically making yourself more feminine, more in your head, more anxious, right? More stressed, your mood. That's also why testosterone has such a good effect on the mood, because it does something in your brain, it signals, right? Because of the fact that there are androgen receptors. Now you might be asking, how long does this last, right? It turns out that after copulation, orgasm, whatever, ejaculation, right? The downregulation of those androgen receptors lasts always 72 hours. However, their magnitude, their effect, how much of these androgen receptors are downregulated, the expression, that's dependent on how many times you ejaculate. So naturally, the more times, the less androgen receptors you're going to have for those 72 hours. Okay, so that's it. When it comes to like biochemical facts, let's say, we have the prolactin spike, this is what it causes, less GnRH, less sensitive luteinizing hormone, all that. You have a dopamine spike, you have the fact, which I didn't even write on the board, that after 7 days there is an increase in testosterone, whatever, and you have the downregulation of androgen receptors in the brain, which causes you to be more feminine, to feel more feminine, to act more feminine in the world. One of my favorite testosterone things is that it makes you ruthless. It makes you just pursue your goals with you know, you don't give a fuck, you know, you're not in your head, you're just there, right? Maybe it's, you know, you don't want to be a machine and stuff, emotionless, but it is very useful as a tool, right? So that's that. Now, let's talk about some anecdotal experience. So I began experimenting with this about 3 years ago, right? I was weighing like, I don't know, 114 kilograms, 118. I was a fat fuck basically. And I was like, no, we got to fix this. Like, I can't be a fat, useless fuck anymore. I got to be the king of the world. Do you know what I mean? So I was basically trying everything. I got into cold showers. I was working out. I was reading books. Every single minute of my day was spent productively to continue. And one of the things I started researching into is, because I know thermodynamics and everybody says it, right? Energy can neither be destroyed or created. It can only change forms. It can only transmutate. I thought, well, look, libido is a sort of energy, right? And I started researching into people who used it, right? And it turns out, for example, that Mike Tyson was celibate for 5 years in his peak. It turns out, for example, that Steve Jobs, whenever there was a problem or like a big move that Apple was doing, he would not consciously not ejaculate with his wife. Even his wife was saying it, right? So I started experimenting with this, and I did a 146-day streak about 3 years ago, 2.5. And honestly, the results the results were because of my actions, but the fact that I had the energy and the consistency to do the actions I did, to wake up every day at 6, cold shower, 2 espressos, and I did 2 hours of deep work studying testosterone, studying this shit. Bro, the amount of times, the amount of notebooks I wrote down with like routines that I have to try, effects, mechanisms and stuff, right? I did this for 2 hours. Then I took a little break, double espresso, another 2 hours. Then I took another little break, double espresso, and then I did 2 hours on my final bachelor end project in my university. I was in the final year, the most important year of university, and I was just like, I wasn't giving a fuck about it. I was 4 hours just deep work, the most important 4 hours, the morning ones of the day, just spending on this, right? I was doing 9 workouts per week, right? I was doing 3 boxing sessions, I was doing 4 gym sessions, and 2 extra cardio sessions for the cardiovascular ability for boxing, right? I was doing 10,000 steps daily, religiously, 2,500 calories daily. Every single day I ate the same thing, just measured out every gram of rice, right? No cheat days. In fact, you know, this is all too extreme. I don't recommend you do that because you're going to fuck up your body and you're going to burn out. But I was also fasting for 44 hours every week. I was doing a 2-day fast every single week. Do you know what I mean? 2 nights and an afternoon basically, and a morning. So yeah, do I recommend this? I don't think so. But the fact that I had this ability, the fact that I had this like superhuman strength, you know, it it definitely accelerated my growth, right? So that's definitely that. When it comes to the effects that like abstinence has on your libido, well, I can say this: after 3 days, this I can feel extremely precisely. After 3 days, you become someone else. You become much more ruthless. You become much more like just goal-oriented masculine, right? After 7 days, between day 7 and day 14, you're an absolute barbarian. You're an animal. Nothing can get in your way. Like, you know, sometimes I'm driving a car. Maybe I don't do this so much, the 7 to 14 days, but you know, back in the past, I'm driving a car and someone just like stops me or cuts me off, and I would fucking murder him. Do you know what I mean? That's the feelings, that's the thought I'm having, the thoughts, what's going on in my head basically, right? However, when it comes to libido, it's very much use it or lose it, right? It's very much like a muscle. If you don't use your dick, it's gonna, and not atrophy, but it's gonna say, okay, well, you're not using it, so I might as well not have it. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that energy still has to go somewhere, and it goes into your work, into your actions, right? Into your just relentlessness. So, all that being said, that is my anecdotal experience. I experimented with this once more for like a month and a half, and the same thing happened. Even for a month and a half, I was on keto, perfect carnivore diet, right, with a bit of cheese and stuff. I was working very long hours. I was basically going, you know, coming back home at 9 from work. I was working a sales job. I was waking up at 4 a.m. I was going for runs, like hill sprints. I was reading business books one after another. I was still going to the gym. Do you know what I mean? I was like beginning to script these videos a little bit, etc., because that was my initial phase. And truthfully, I was doing that practice, and I had this relentlessness, this limitless energy. So the conclusion I want to bring out is, it is a tool. It's not a lifestyle. I don't think so, because life, in fact, is a marathon. It's not a sprint. There are times where you need to sprint, where you need to hunt down the gazelle to eat it, right? But life is a marathon. We're here for a limited amount of time. Let's enjoy it. And even, you know, considering all this, like let's look at the fun that we actually have in the world. We don't drink, like we don't play video games, we don't watch porn, we don't wank off, we don't, you know what I mean? We don't do these things. We don't eat shit food. Like most of our fun actually comes from achieving goals, right? It comes from working, it comes from grinding and just progressing, right? So, you know, maybe it's, in my opinion at least, it's like, well, I'm gonna have at least a bit of, you know, a bit of pleasure, a bit of dopamine, a bit of a release, right? And I'm gonna do it in such a way that it actually fulfills my needs. Because I always say this, we are spiritual animals and we all have these like bars. Imagine in The Sims, you have these bars with your needs, right? And let's say that, you know, it's morning hours, let's say this is hunger, right? So you wake up, you don't feel that hungry, right? This is like, you know, 7 a.m. Let's say this is now 12 a.m. You start feeling a little bit hungry. This is, you know, your body's starting to tell you, okay, listen, it's time to eat. And let's say now this is like 18, right? This is like 6 p.m. Now it's like here, now your body's really hungry. Now it's like, now you're thinking about it, you're feeling it. And this mechanism works with every single desire, every single need, every single human need, right? There's no other way to put it. And if I can achieve some of these needs, such as intimacy, sex, whatever, through this, well, you know, I just prolong the ability for me to be productive. I enjoy life more. And then I bring this energy to my work. I bring this energy to the gym, for example. If you go to the gym and you look at the people there, the biggest ones are not the ones that have the best training routine. No, they're the ones who enjoy it the most. They're the ones who can come consistently year after year after year. And same thing with work, right? The best professionals, the ones who achieved mastery, they just did it for years on end and they enjoyed it. And it became deliberate practice for them, right? Because they enjoyed every single moment of it. So this is the mindset. And obviously, once you do fulfill those needs, once you're in this abundant state because your body is happy, then you bring a different style of energy, a different energy into your work, into your inputs, etc., right? Into your life. You're much happier. So, in conclusion, what do I do? What do I think is best? Well, first of all, don't wank off and don't watch porn. These two things, cuck behavior, fuck off. You know what I mean? Like, don't watch that shit and don't do that shit. If there's a chance, you know, if you're getting laid, whatever, you know, decide. You can stop before let's say the time that you have to, you know, release, and you can preserve it still, or you can just release. You can just have that, you know, that blissful feeling. It's up to you. I would recommend do it in the night if you want to release. In the mornings, I recommend if you're a professional. I sometimes fail at my own fucking rules. I sometimes I sometimes fail anyways, but like in the mornings, try to either abstain or like, or not ejaculate. But there you go. That's what I think. Well, the decision in the end, it's up to you, right? But all that being said, it is a tool, right? And you've had the effects at the start. This is what it looks like.